The fluorescent lights of the mess hall buzzed with the same monotonous hum they had for 30 years, casting pale yellow across rows of metal tables where sailors ate in clusters, their voices rising and falling like tide against shore. Lieutenant Commander Iris Phantom Cade sat alone near the far wall, her tray untouched, eyes fixed on nothing in particular, the thousand-yard stare of someone who'd seen things that couldn't be unseen. She was small, almost diminutive, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and a face that looked too young for the silver oak leaves on her collar. Most people assumed she was a logistics officer or maybe intelligence. They never guessed what she really was. The 5 recruits approached like wolves circling wounded prey. Fresh out of basic, all swagger and testosterone, they'd been drinking in the confidence that comes from wearing the uniform for the first time. The tallest one, a kid from Oklahoma with a buzz cut and a jawline that suggested more bravado than brains, led the pack. His name tape read MORRSON. Behind him, 4 others fanned out, blocking the exits without realizing they were doing it, pack behavior, instinctual and stupid. "Hey there, Lieutenant," Morrison drawled, his voice carrying across the mess hall. Conversations began to die, heads turned. "You lost. Intel offices are on the other side of the building." Iris didn't move. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of her tray, and if you looked closely, really closely, you might have noticed the scars on her knuckles, the kind that come from breaking things that don't break easily. She didn't look at Morrison, didn't acknowledge him at all. This only made him bolder. "I'm talking to you, ma'am," he said, the title dripping with mockery. His friend snickered. "We just wanted to make sure you knew where you were. This is a working mess hall for real sailors." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes violence. It hung in the air like smoke before fire, and the older petty officers at nearby tables recognized it immediately. One of them, a master chief with 3 decades under his belt, slowly stood up, his chair scraping against linoleum. But before he could intervene, Iris finally moved. She stood slowly, deliberately, and when she turned to face Morrison, her eyes were the color of Arctic ice. "I know exactly where I am, sailor," she said quietly. Morrison reached for her shoulder, and that's when everything changed. The first thing witnesses would later report was the speed. Morrison's hand never made contact. Iris moved like water, like something that couldn't be held or stopped. She redirected his arm, used his momentum against him, and suddenly the big recruit was airborne. He hit the floor with a sound like a side of beef dropped from a height, the air exploding from his lungs. His friend on the left lunged forward. Wrong move. Iris pivoted, her elbow catching him in the solar plexus with surgical precision. He folded, gasping, and went down hard. The third recruit hesitated, which was his first intelligent decision, but momentum carried him forward anyway. She swept his legs, controlled his fall, put him face down on the linoleum with his arm locked behind him in a joint lock that promised agony if he moved. The 4th and 5th recruits froze, their hands raised, eyes wide. The whole thing had taken maybe 15 seconds. Iris released the 3rd recruit and stepped back, her breathing barely elevated. Morrison rolled onto his side, coughing, his face red. The mess hall was dead silent. 300 sailors watched this small woman standing over 5 recruits like a lioness over cubs who'd forgotten their place. "Anyone else want to discuss my qualifications?" Iris asked, her voice still quiet, still controlled. Nobody moved. The Master Chief, who'd started to intervene, settled back into his chair, a grim smile on his face. He'd seen this before, years ago, on another base. He knew what she was even if these kids didn't. Morrison struggled to his feet, his pride more damaged than his body. You assaulted me," he wheezed, trying to find his authority again. "I'll have your commission for this." Iris tilted her head slightly, and for the first time something like amusement flickered across her face. "Will you now?" Not a question, a statement. She reached up and tapped the insignia on her collar, not the oak leaves but the smaller pin beside it, the trident, the seal trident. Morrison's face went from red to white in an instant. Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Iris said, her voice carrying across the silent mess hall. DEVGRU, SEAL Team 6, 12 years operational, 4 combat deployments, 57 confirmed direct action missions, 3 years as a fast attack vehicle pilot in Afghanistan before transitioning to rotary wing, then fixed-wing tactical aviation. I've flown missions you'll never read about in places that don't exist on maps. She paused, letting it sink in. I've earned my place at this table. Have you earned yours? Morrison couldn't speak. None of them could. They stood there, 5 recruits who just learned the hardest lesson the Navy teaches. Never assume you know someone's story by looking at their face. Iris sat back down, pulled her tray closer, and resumed eating as if nothing had happened. The mess hall slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones. But everyone was watching her now, seeing her differently. The Master Chief raised his coffee cup in a subtle salute. She didn't acknowledge it, but her lips twitched slightly, almost a smile. Morrison and his friends retreated, their swagger gone, replaced by the hollow look of men who just confronted their own ignorance. They would never forget this. None of them would. And word would spread, it always did. By tomorrow morning, everyone on the base would know about the lieutenant commander who'd put 5 recruits on the floor in 40 seconds. But what they wouldn't know, what they couldn't know, was why she sat alone. Why her eyes carried that distance. Why someone with her credentials was flying training missions out of a stateside base instead of operating somewhere in the dark corners of the world. That story was classified, buried under layers of secrecy that even most admirals couldn't access. And Iris intended to keep it that way. She finished her meal in silence, carried her tray to the disposal area, and walked out of the mess hall without looking back. Behind her, whispers followed like wake behind a boat. The legend of Phantom was just beginning, though the woman herself wanted nothing to do with legends. She'd left that life behind, or tried to. But the past has a way of refusing to stay buried, and in 3 days, a mission would come down from JSOC that would drag her back into the world she'd fought so hard to escape. For now, though, she had a flight to prepare for. Tomorrow at 0600, she'd be taking a pair of fresh Nugget pilots up for carrier qualification training. They didn't know who their instructor was yet. They'd probably heard the rumors, the ghost pilot who never spoke, never smiled, who flew like she was born with wings. They'd expect a man, probably. Most people did. The call sign Phantom suggested something spectral, dangerous, masculine. They'd be surprised. They always were. Iris walked across the tarmac as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of burning oil fields, of missions flown at dusk when the light played tricks and every shadow could hide a threat. She forced the memories down, compartmentalized them the way she'd been trained. The past was the past. This was now. She reached the hangar where her bird waited, an FA-18F Super Hornet, gray and deadly, its twin engines capable of pushing her past Mach 1.8, its weapon systems interface more familiar to her than her own apartment. She'd logged 3,000 hours in various aircraft, but the Hornet was her favorite. Reliable. Honest. It didn't lie to you or pretend to be something it wasn't. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cool metal under her palm. Tomorrow's flight would be routine, basic carrier approaches, touch-and-goes, emergency procedures. Nothing like the missions she'd flown in her previous life, when routine meant inserting SEALs behind enemy lines or providing close air support for operations that would never be acknowledged. But routine was what she wanted now. Routine was safe. Routine meant nobody died on her watch. The crew chief approached, a young petty officer named Rodriguez who treated the aircraft like it was made of crystal. "She's ready for tomorrow, Commander. Ran all the checks twice. Everything's green." "Thank you, Rodriguez." Iris's voice was soft, almost gentle. She was always gentle with the crew chiefs. They worked miracles keeping these birds in the air, and most officers treated them like furniture. "Get some rest. It's going to be a long day." "You too, ma'am." Rodriguez hesitated, then added, "We heard what happened in the mess hall." Iris's expression didn't change, and just wanted to say, "It's an honor working with you, ma'am. Real honor." She nodded once, uncomfortable with the praise. "The honor's mine, Rodriguez. These birds don't fly themselves." She left him there and headed back toward the bachelor officer quarters, her boots clicking on the concrete with mechanical precision. The base was quieting down for the evening, the day shift giving way to night operations. Somewhere on the flight line, a helicopter spun up, its rotors beating the air with that distinctive whump-whump sound that made her chest tighten with sense memory. She'd flown helos in another life. Fast movers were cleaner, more distant. You didn't hear people screaming over the roar of a jet engine. Her quarters were Spartan: a bed, a desk, a small bookshelf with technical manuals and a few novels she pretended to read. No pictures on the walls. No personal items except a wooden box on the desk that she never opened but couldn't throw away. Inside were her decorations: silver star, bronze star with valor device, purple heart, and others that didn't have names, given in ceremonies that never happened. She'd earned them bleeding. She kept them hidden, because they represented a person she didn't want to be anymore. But that person wouldn't stay buried. She never did. Iris lay on her bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, and waited for sleep that wouldn't come. In 3 days, everything would change. In 3 days, the call would arrive, and she'd have to make a choice between the peace she'd built and the duty she'd sworn. The same choice she'd made 100 times before, always with the same result. Because when the nation called, people like Iris Cade didn't say no. They couldn't. It was coded into their DNA, written in scar tissue and calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like an island. She focused on it, used it to anchor herself in the present, away from the memories that prowled like predators at the edge of consciousness. Afghanistan, Syria, places without names, faces of people she'd carried out or left behind. The weight of those ghosts never lessened. You just got better at carrying them. Tomorrow she'd fly. Tomorrow she'd teach young pilots how to survive. Tomorrow she'd pretend to be normal. But in 3 days, pretending would end. The phone on her desk rang at 0300, shattering the quiet like broken glass. Iris was awake before the second ring, her hand reaching for the receiver with the automatic response of someone who'd received middle-of-the-night calls more times than she could count. Nothing good ever came from a phone call at 3 in the morning. "Cade." Her voice was clear, alert, showing no sign she'd been asleep even though she hadn't been. "Commander Cade, this is JSOC Operations. Authenticate Tango X-Ray 79er. The voice was crisp, professional, the tone of someone reading from a script. Iris's heart rate didn't change, but something inside her went cold and still. JSOC didn't call for routine matters. She reached for her personal crypto card, read off the authentication code, and waited while they verified. 3 seconds felt like an hour. Authentication confirmed. "Commander, you are to report to Building 7 for immediate briefing. A car is en route to your location. You have 10 minutes to prepare. This is a priority 1 tasking. Acknowledge." Acknowledged. She hung up without another word. 10 minutes. She was dressed and ready in 4, her go bag already packed because operators never fully stand down. Black cargo pants, tactical boots, a simple gray shirt under a light jacket that concealed her sidearm. She had a carry permit that came with her security clearance, and old habits die hard. The wooden box of medals went into a drawer. If she didn't come back, someone else could deal with them. The car arrived exactly on time, a black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak. They drove through the base in silence, past darkened buildings and street lights that created pools of yellow on empty roads. Building 7 was on the far side of the installation, in an area most personnel didn't even know existed. It had no windows and multiple levels of security. She'd been here once before, 2 years ago, when they'd offered her a position she'd turned down. Inside, the building was all harsh lighting and beige walls, the architectural equivalent of bureaucracy. but bureaucracy with teeth. Armed guards at every checkpoint, biometric scanners, the kind of security that suggested whatever happened here mattered to people whose names appeared in history books. They led her to a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, on the third basement level. The room was small, soundproofed, with a conference table and secure video feeds showing encrypted seals. Two people waited inside, a Navy captain she didn't recognize and a civilian in an expensive suit who had intelligence agency written all over him. "Commander Cade," the captain said, standing. "Thank you for coming on short notice. I'm Captain Hernandez, JSOC Maritime Operations. This is Deputy Director Okonkwo, CIA Special Activities Center." Iris nodded, didn't sit. "What's the situation?" Hernandez gestured to the screen where a satellite image appeared, desert terrain, a compound surrounded by walls, vehicles in various states of disrepair. Somewhere in the Middle East, she guessed. They all looked the same after a while. 72 hours ago, an asset in Yemen transmitted intelligence regarding a high-value target, Okonkwo said, his voice smooth but urgent. "Someone we've been hunting for 6 years. But there's a complication. The compound is in a valley with extreme terrain challenges. Only one pilot in the Navy has successfully flown tactical insertions in similar conditions." He didn't need to say the name. She knew. "I'm out," Iris said flatly. "I don't do this anymore." "We're not asking you to." Hernandez pulled up another image, a young woman in a flight suit, Hispanic, confident smile. Lieutenant Sophia Reyes, Callsign Cruz. Top of her class at Whidbey Island, excellent marks in tactical aviation. She's been selected for the mission, but she needs an instructor, someone who's flown the terrain, someone who's been there. Iris studied the photo. Reyes looked like she did 10 years ago, hungry, eager, believing the missions mattered more than they did. "You want me to train her?" "We want you to prepare her for something you've already survived," Okonkwo said. "You flew 12 missions in similar valleys. You know the wind patterns, the optical illusions, the failure points. You can give her the edge she needs to come home alive." It was manipulation, pure and simple. Appeal to duty, to the protective instinct that made operators throw themselves on grenades for their teammates. But it was also true. Reyes would die if she went in unprepared, and Iris had the knowledge to prevent that. The weight of that truth settled on her shoulders like a rucksack full of stones. "How long do I have?" she asked quietly. 72 hours, Hernandez said. "Then she flies the mission whether she's ready or not. The window closes." 3 days. Less than half the time needed for proper preparation. But it would have to be enough because it was all they had. Iris looked at the photo again, at Reyes' smile, and wondered if it would survive what was coming. Probably not. That kind of innocence never did. "I'll need full mission parameters, terrain data, weather forecasts, and complete access to the airframe she'll be flying," Iris said, her voice shifting into the clipped efficiency of operational planning. "I want her in the air by 0700, and I want every second of training logged and reviewed. If she's not capable, I'm pulling the plug. I don't care about your timeline or your asset. I won't send someone to die." Hernandez and Okonkwo exchanged glances. They'd expected resistance, maybe outright refusal. What they got was something harder, conditional cooperation with non-negotiable terms. But they were desperate, and desperation makes people agree to things they'd normally fight. "Done," Hernandez said. "She'll be briefed tonight and ready by dawn. Commander, I know this isn't what you wanted." "It never is," Iris interrupted. "But wants don't matter. Getting Lieutenant Reyes home alive matters. Everything else is noise." She left without being dismissed, walked out of the SCIF and back through the checkpoints with the bearing of someone who'd done this too many times to be impressed by the theater of it all. The car waited to take her back to her quarters, but she waved it off. She needed to walk, needed to feel the night air and process what she'd just agreed to. The base was silent except for distant sounds of the ocean and the occasional vehicle passing. She walked past the hangars where her aircraft waited, past the administrative buildings where decisions were made that cost lives in distant places, past the memorial wall where names were etched in granite, pilots who hadn't come home, sailors who'd given everything. She knew 3 of those names personally, had flown with them, drank with them, mourned them. Now she was going to train someone who might join them. The thought made her sick, but the alternative, letting Reyes go in blind, was worse. So she'd do what she always did: compartmentalize, focus on the mission, teach everything she knew, and hope it was enough. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow 700 Hangar 5, come ready to work. Reyes." Iris allowed herself a small smile. At least the kid had initiative. She sent back a single word: Roger. The rest of the night passed in preparation. She pulled terrain maps, studied weather patterns, reviewed after-action reports from missions she'd flown in similar environments. The valley in Yemen was a death trap: high walls that created turbulence, unpredictable thermals, limited ingress and egress routes. Flying it at night under NVGs with the threat of enemy fire would test even an experienced pilot. Reyes was good, according to her file, but good wasn't always enough when the margins were measured in meters and seconds. By dawn, Iris had a training plan that would compress months of experience into 3 days. It would be brutal, exhausting, and possibly insufficient, but it was what she had. She arrived at Hangar 5 at 0645, early because operators are always early. The hangar smelled of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid and possibility, the scent of aviation that never quite left your clothes or your memory. Inside, a MH-60S helicopter sat under harsh lights, its rotors tied down, its weapon systems removed for training. Not what Reyes would fly on the actual mission, but close enough for preparation. Lieutenant Sophia Reyes stood beside the aircraft, flight suit crisp, dark hair pulled back, her face showing that mix of confidence and nervousness that comes before important events. She snapped to attention when Iris approached, but the older woman waved it off. "We don't have time for formality," Iris said. "How much do you know about the mission?" "Enough to know it scares me," Reyes admitted, and Iris respected her for the honesty. Pilots who claimed they weren't afraid were either lying or dangerously overconfident. Fear kept you sharp. "They said you flew similar valleys, 12 times. 13. One was classified so deep it doesn't exist in any database." Iris circled the helicopter, her eyes cataloging details automatically. "I came back from all of them, some barely. You're going to learn why." She spent the next hour walking Reyes through the basics: terrain assessment, wind reading, the way light plays tricks in confined spaces, how to trust your instruments when your eyes lie. The younger pilot absorbed it all, asking smart questions, taking notes on a tablet that would later be destroyed for security reasons. "The valley walls create Venturi effects," Iris explained, sketching on a whiteboard. "The wind accelerates, becomes unpredictable. You'll hit shear that can drop you 50 feet in a second. Your instinct will be to fight it. Don't. Ride it like a wave. Fighting it will kill you." "How do you know when to ride and when to fight?" Reyes asked. "You feel it, but feeling takes time you don't have. So instead, you watch for tells: dust patterns, vegetation movement, how the air looks. Thermals shimmer. Downdrafts are invisible until they're not. You're going to learn to see what isn't there." They flew for 6 hours straight, Iris in the left seat talking Reyes through scenarios, calling out problems, creating emergencies. She was merciless, demanding, pushing the younger pilot to the edge of capability and then beyond. Twice Reyes wanted to quit. Both times Iris wouldn't let her. "In Yemen, you don't get to quit," she said coldly after Reyes nearly clipped a simulated ridgeline. "You either execute perfectly or you die and take your team with you. Is that what you want? To be the pilot who killed her own?" Reyes's eyes flashed with anger, but she channeled it into focus. The next approach was textbook perfect, and the one after that, and the one after that. By the end of the day, she was exhausted but capable, her hands moving with the muscle memory that would save her when conscious thought was too slow. They debriefed in silence, both women too tired for words. Finally, Reyes spoke. "They told me you turned down a position at JSOC. Why come back for this?" Iris was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what happens if you go in unprepared, and I can't carry any more names." The younger pilot nodded, understanding what wasn't said. The weight of the dead, the responsibility of survival, the burden of being the one who came home when others didn't. It was a weight she'd carry soon enough if the mission went south. "Tomorrow we go harder," Iris said, standing. "Get rest, hydrate. Tomorrow I teach you how to fly afraid." She walked out into the dusk, leaving Reyes alone with the aircraft and her thoughts. 2 days left. 48 hours to compress years of experience into reflexes that would determine life or death. The odds weren't good, but then they never were. You played the hand you were dealt and hoped skill could beat chance. The next 2 days blurred together in a cycle of flight, debrief, study, sleep. Iris pushed Reyes harder than anyone had ever pushed her, creating scenarios that would make most pilots refuse to fly. Night insertions with NVGs. Simulated engine failures in the worst possible positions. Fire drills. Hydraulic failures. Multiple emergencies cascading together because Murphy's Law didn't care about fairness. And through it all, Reyes improved. Not just in skill, but in mindset. She learned to stay calm when everything went wrong, to prioritize threats, to trust her training when instinct screamed to do something else. She learned to fly the way Iris flew, with calculated precision and controlled aggression, treating the aircraft as an extension of her own body. On the final night before the mission, they sat in the hangar with coffee and silence. The mission brief had come through hours earlier. Reyes would fly at 0200, insert a SEAL team into the valley and extract them after they secured the target. Simple on paper, deadly in execution. "Tell me what you're really thinking," Iris said quietly. Reyes stared at her coffee. "I'm thinking I don't want to let anyone down. You, the team, myself." "You won't." Iris spoke with certainty she didn't entirely feel. "You're ready, not perfect but ready. And ready is enough if you stay smart and don't take stupid risks. The mission matters, but coming home matters more. Remember that when things get hard." "Did you always come home?" Reyes asked. "My body did the rest," Iris shrugged. "The rest stayed in those valleys, but you're stronger than I was. You'll keep more of yourself." It was a lie, gentle and well-intentioned. Everyone left pieces of themselves in combat, but Reyes needed to believe in her own resilience, so Iris gave her that gift even though it cost her to do it. They parted with a handshake that became a brief hug, two warriors acknowledging the bond formed through shared trial. Reyes would fly in 4 hours. By dawn, she'd either be a veteran with a story or a name on a memorial wall. There was no middle ground in this kind of work. Iris didn't sleep. She couldn't. Instead, she sat in the hangar and waited, watching the maintenance crews prepare the actual mission bird, a heavily modified MH-60M with upgraded avionics, defensive systems, and fuel tanks that would give Reyes the range she needed. It was a beautiful machine, deadly and graceful, the kind of aircraft that demanded respect and gave loyalty in return. At 0130, Reyes arrived with her crew. They went through pre-flight checks with mechanical precision, each step rehearsed and verified. Iris watched from the shadows, staying out of the way, her presence unnecessary now but somehow required. She'd trained Reyes. Now she had to trust that training. The SEALs arrived in a truck, 8 men carrying enough weaponry to start a small war. Their team leader, a master chief named Jackson who Iris had worked with in Afghanistan, nodded to her. "She ready?" "As anyone can be for this." Iris kept her voice neutral. "Take care of her." "Roger that." Jackson's eyes held understanding. He'd lost pilots before, knew what it cost. "She's got good hands, we'll bring her home." The helicopter spun up, rotors beating the air with increasing intensity until the sound was physical. something you felt in your chest. Reyes went through her final checks, her movements smooth and confident. She caught Iris's eye through the cockpit window and gave a thumbs up. Iris returned it, then stepped back as the bird lifted off, its navigation lights disappearing into the darkness like a star falling upward. And then there was nothing to do but wait. Hours passed like years. Iris sat in the ready room with a radio tuned to the operations frequency, listening to encrypted traffic that told her nothing and everything. She could hear the tension in the voices, the clipped communications that meant things were going wrong or about to. She'd been on enough missions to read the subtext. Then at 0415, a transmission that made her blood freeze. Lightning 26 taking fire, multiple hits, maintaining control. Reyes' call sign. Iris was on her feet, her hands gripping the table edge so hard her knuckles went white. Time seemed to stop. Every second felt like an eternity, and she was back in those valleys, back in the cockpit, feeling the aircraft shudder as rounds punched through metal, hearing the warning alarms, making the calculations that separated life from death. Lightning 26, say status. The operations controller's voice was urgent. Static, too much static. Then, 26 were trailing smoke but maintaining altitude. Hydraulics compromised but responsive. Continuing mission. Iris exhaled slowly. Reyes wasn't panicking, wasn't aborting. She was flying the aircraft, managing the damage, staying focused on the mission. Exactly what Iris had trained her to do. The pride she felt was eclipsed only by the terror of knowing what could happen next. The minutes crawled past. More transmissions. The SEALs were engaged, targets neutralized, preparing for extraction. And Reyes was there, holding position under fire, the aircraft damaged but functional, her voice steady on the radio as she coordinated the pickup. It was textbook flying under the worst possible conditions. Then finally, Lightning 26 departing target area, all personnel aboard, heading to extract point. The relief in the operations center was palpable, but Iris knew better than to relax. The flight out was just as dangerous as the flight in, maybe more so with a damaged aircraft. She listened to every transmission, tracking Reyes' progress across hostile territory, 30 minutes that felt like a lifetime. At 0543 the call came. Lightning 26 feet wet, egressing area, all souls accounted for. They'd made it to international waters, made it out. The mission was complete. Iris sat down hard, her legs suddenly weak, the adrenaline that had sustained her evaporating and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Reyes had done it, had flown into hell and brought everyone home. The training had worked. The preparation had been enough. She left the operations center and walked to the flight line where Reyes would land in 20 minutes. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in those same orange and purple hues that always reminded Iris of war. But this morning they looked different, hopeful maybe, or perhaps she was just too tired to see them clearly. The helicopter appeared as a dark shape against the rising sun, trailing a thin line of smoke but flying steady. Reyes brought it in smooth despite the damage, touching down with the gentle precision of someone who respected the aircraft and the people it carried. The rotors spun down, and the SEALs dismounted, exhausted but alive, moving with the careful deliberation of men who knew they'd been lucky. Reyes climbed out last, her flight suit soaked with sweat, her face showing the strain of 6 hours of intense flying. She looked older somehow, like she'd aged years in a single night. That's what combat did. Compressed time made you ancient in hours. She saw Iris waiting and walked over, her gait unsteady. They stood facing each other, instructor and student, veteran and veteran now, bound by shared experience and the unspoken understanding of what it meant to survive. "You did good," Iris said simply. Reyes nodded, unable to speak, her eyes bright with tears she wouldn't shed. Not here, not in front of everyone. Later, maybe in private, she'd let herself feel the enormity of what she'd just lived through. But for now, she held it together with the discipline that kept operators functional long after normal people would break. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for everything, for knowing what I'd need." Iris squeezed her shoulder. "You did the work, I just showed you the path. Now go get debriefed and then get some sleep. You've earned it." She watched Reyes walk toward the debriefing building, surrounded by the SEALs who trusted her with their lives and been proven right. The younger pilot glanced back once, and Iris raised her hand in acknowledgement. Then Reyes was gone, disappearing into the building where she'd tell her story to intelligence officers who'd never understand what it really meant. Iris stood alone on the flight line as the sun climbed higher, warming her face. The mission was over. Reyes was safe. The training had worked. So why did she feel so empty? Because teaching someone to survive meant showing them the darkness, and once you'd seen it, you could never unsee it. She'd given Reyes skills that would keep her alive and scars that would never fully heal. It was a bargain every combat pilot made, whether they realized it or not. She turned and walked back toward her quarters, her boots clicking on the tarmac with mechanical precision, each step taking her further from the mission and closer to whatever came next. Because there was always a next. The war didn't end just because you wanted it to. It kept going, kept demanding, kept taking pieces of you until there was nothing left but muscle memory and scar tissue. But at least Reyes was alive. At least this time, the story had a happy ending. Iris would take that victory, small as it was, and add it to the collection of reasons she kept going when quitting would be easier. Because someone had to teach the next generation how to survive. Someone had to pass on the hard-won lessons written in blood and fear and the terrible beauty of flying into darkness. And if that someone was her, then so be it. She'd carry that burden like she carried all the others, quietly, without complaint, with the grim determination of someone who'd chosen duty over happiness so many times the choice had become automatic. That's what it meant to be Phantom. Not a ghost of the dead, but a guardian of the living, a teacher of survival, a carrier of the weight that others couldn't bear. The sun rose higher, burning away the last shadows of night. Somewhere a new mission was being planned. Somewhere another pilot would need training, and when that call came, Iris would answer. Because that's what she did. That's who she was. Not the person she'd wanted to be, but the person the job required. And in the end, that was enough. It had to be.